It's starting the stream.
Okay, so you must tell me when I can start chatting and welcoming people in.
I'm going to open the webinar now.
All right. All right, so for those of you who are just joining us, welcome to this live panel discussion hosted by Strake Nature. And for this evening's event, it's titled Pangolins Are People Too. My name is Mdunduli, and I'm coming to you live from Johannesburg. So in the few minutes that we have, I'm just going to ask you to please be patient with us before the event officially begins, while we let people in to the Zoom. So I know we're expecting quite a large audience tonight, and also an international audience. So please just be patient with us as we allow people in. In fact, I should say good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, because people are joining us from all over the world. So thank you for taking the time to be part of this panel discussion. So while people are just coming in and joining us, it would be so nice to know, for those of you who've already joined us, please tell us where you are joining us from. As I've said, I'm coming to you live from Johannesburg, South Africa. So please just use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to just write down to us the name of the country and the name of the city from which you are joining us. That would be very nice to know. So while people are doing that, I'm just going to share some housekeeping announcements or guidelines for those of you who've already joined us. This event will be recorded, and you will be able to receive a video of the recording at the Penguin Random House South Africa YouTube channel. So if you don't get a chance to watch the panel discussion from beginning to end, you will be able to get a recording of that. And also throughout the event, we encourage you to use the Q&A function or button at the bottom of your screen to post your questions to us. These questions will be collected, and then at the end of the discussion with our panelists, there will be a Q&A session where your questions will be addressed. And also as the audience, you'll be able to upvote the questions that you wish to be addressed first. And any questions, unfortunately, because of time, any questions that will not be addressed or answered, we will be able to answer them, but via email. And so the people who post them will be able to get the answers and the responses from our panelists, however, via email. So throughout the event, I do encourage you to post your questions. So hopefully we will be able to get to all of them in time, or in the time that we have. And also this might not be relevant because maybe our team will mute people as they come in, but please just make sure that your sound is muted so that we don't have any background noises that are coming in that might interfere with the panel discussion. Let me just see, maybe some people have already told us where they're joining us from. So we have a lot of people. So we have John Greenland, who's joining us from Johannesburg. And he's saying hello to all the panelists. And then we have Neil Britton, who's joining us from England. Good evening to you all. We have Penny Orton from Durban. Durban actually is my home. I was born in Durban. I lived in Durban for 33 years until I moved to Johannesburg fairly recently. So that's very nice. And then of course we have Ray, we have Nikki, we have Wendy, and we have Karine, who are the panelists today. And then let's see who else is joining us from where. People are just saying hi. So we have Nanushka Jackson, who's joining us from Cape Town. So we have a few people who are from overseas. Oh, and then we have Mobalaji Ido, who's joining us from Nigeria. So welcome. So that's nice to know. And then we have Eva, who's joining us from Germany. So as I said, we are expecting quite a large international audience. And then Alana Adams is joining us from the UK. So thank you very much for that. And as I said, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. And it is now just a few minutes after 6:30, and I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to officially begin the event. So this evening's title of this panel discussion is Pangolins Are People Too, and the focus will be stories from humans living with anteaters. And some of the points that will be addressed or will be covered in this panel discussion are pangolins rescued from traffickers come in all shapes, sizes, and states of health. Do the rehabilitators ever feel like giving up? How much of their hearts do they give to these animals? What's so special about pangolins? And what's new and exciting? What is the new and exciting pangolin facts that the scientists are uncovering? Would it matter if the world's most trafficked mammal became extinct? Why do humans fall in love with a miniature armored vehicle with a long tongue? What does it feel like sitting in a vehicle with a loaded pistol on the seat beside you, waiting for a sting operation to go down? So these will just be a few of the points that will be covered this afternoon. So I'm just going to introduce our panelists and then officially hand over to the chair of the discussion. So we have Professor Ray Janssen, who is a professor of ornithology at the Tshwane University of Technology located in Pretoria in South Africa. He is also the founder and chairman of the African Pangolin Working Group, which is a non-profit organization dedicated to the conservation of Africa's 4 pangolin species and the habitats that occupy. So on the chat, there will be links that you can click on that will take you to a platform where you can support and donate to the African Pangolin Working Group. So please just keep an eye on the chat for those links. We also have Dr. Karine Lawrence from the Johannesburg Wildlife Veterinary Hospital, and she is the founder and director and head of the veterinarian of the Johannesburg Wildlife Veterinary Hospital with Dr. Nikki Wright. That's an always difficult word to pronounce. So combining a veterinary facility and a wildlife rehabilitation center, one of the species of the hospital that the hospital specializes in is the Termix pangolin. So Karine is currently the most experienced veterinarian worldwide in treating the species of pangolin. She's working towards opening a teaching facility for veterinary students and nurses interested in treating and rehabilitating small and medium South African wildlife. Also on the chat, just keep an eye on the chat. There will be a link that will take you to a platform where you can donate and support this hospital. And then we also have Simon Naylor, who is the conservation manager for Pinda, Beyond Pinda Private Game Reserve. And he's been with Pinda for 14 years. And in his role, he's responsible for wildlife management, conservation, research, security, and community liaison. And we also have Dr. Nikki Wright, who is a wildlife rehabilitation specialist with over 20 years practical experience and has worked with over 350 different species of indigenous birds, mammals, and reptiles. And her expertise lie in a range of areas, including rehabilitation, husbandry, wildlife behavior, and release techniques. And Nikki is the executive director of the African Pangolin Working Group, wildlife project manager for the Humane Society International Africa, and director of the Johannesburg Wildlife Veterinary Hospital. And then we have Dr. Wendy Wright, and Dr. Wendy is a wildlife rehabilitation specialist, as I've mentioned, with over 20 years practical experience. Yes, I've mentioned Wendy. So we have Dr. Wendy Paniano, actually, and she is actually on the verge of completing her PhD on the diet, activity, and body temperature patterns of the Termix ground pangolins in the Kalahari. And she's currently fulfilling a role as a project manager of the Kalahari Endangered Ecosystem Project. And studying pangolins for the past 5 years has given Wendy the opportunity to pry into the intimate details of the lives of these charismatic animals. And then finally, I'm going to hand over to Richard Pierce, who's going to be chairing this session. Now, Richard Pierce is an author, radio, TV, and documentary film presenter, and he's best known as a shark conservationist and a former chairman of the Shark Conservation Society and the Shark Trust. A committed environmental activist, he has authored several books, including Orca, about an apex predators, Giant Steps, about elephants, Cuddle Me, Kill Me, which is about the lion industry, Nicole, which is about sharks, a shark's marathon journey, and The Poacher's Moon, which focuses on rhinos. And his most recent book is Pangolins, Scales of Injustice. And all of these have been published by Strake Nature. And there's a documentary that I would like you to look out for called Lions, Bones, Bullets, based on his book about SA's captive lion breeding industry. So just look out for more information about that documentary. So I'm going to hand over now to Richard Pierce to officially begin the panel discussion with our panelists.
Thank you. That was brilliant. I'm beginning to feel a little bit redundant here because I think you've kind of done quite a lot of my job for me. So thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everybody. I've seen people coming in from all over the world, so that's absolutely great. Welcome and thanks for joining us. I always start my shows and broadcasts with a bit of a health warning because I never know what I'm going to say until after I've said it. So that can make for quite a lot of chaos, confusion, and excitement. I'm hoping today we can give you a fast-moving show. We've got some brilliant guys here. All these 5 guys are hands-on pangolin every day. So I think this is quite a unique panel. And that's where I'm going to start, one by one, asking them how, one by one, they got into this world of pangolin. What attracted them and how did they get into it? On my screen at the moment is Karen. So Karen, you first.
It started a few years ago when Nikki and I opened the hospital. And suddenly, one day she put a pangolin in my arms, and it was Mama Lodi, if I remember correctly, Nikki. And she said, "Well, we have to treat it now. There you go." And I had no idea what to do, how, where do you put a drip? Where's the vein? How do you uncurl this thing? So it took quite a lot of trial and error to get to a stage where we knew what we were doing. But once you get to know them, you can actually not help them. They have their own personalities. They're really soft animals. They shy, and they get to know us. And the more we help them, the more they know we want to help. And that shows as well. It's a fascinating animal and so unknown. So much as I'm still unknown about them, and it drives us to know more.
So perhaps Pangolins are people too is not such a balmy title after all.
No.
Ray, how did you get to be in the world of pangolins?
He's muted.
Is Ray there?
It's actually quite bizarre, Richard. I'm an ornithologist, so I don't know if it was an evolutionary downgrade back to mammals or an upgrade. But one of my students was offered a wonderful opportunity to study pangolins in the Kalahari in 2009 and approached me if I would be one of the supervisors for that particular master's degree. And I'd never even seen a pangolin, let alone hear about them. So who's going to turn that down? I said, well, I've got an old vehicle. I've got a couple of rand. Let's do it. And the next minute I knew that it's the most trafficked mammal on earth and no one was really doing anything about it.
Okay.
Mamelodi, by the way, was my first sting operation. It was crazy. It was in the middle of a township in Pretoria. And once we had arrested 4 chaps, there were about 300 around us in 5 minutes. So we used it as a teaching opportunity.
Ray, I'm going to stay with you because you've kind of started where I was going to go with you in about 5 or 6 minutes time, but let's carry on. I'll come back to the rest. I want to know what it feels like to be sitting, waiting for a sting operation to go down with a weapon, knowing that other people may have weapons and knowing that you may be in danger. I want to know what that feels like and why you do it.
Yeah, it's not easy to explain. I think anybody who's been in any type of conflict situation would be a little bit torn about, trying to rationalize it or put it into words. It's not a pleasant experience. 1 in 5 to sort of 1 in 6 operations do involve weapons, but it's needless to say, it's very daunting. But one of the comforting factors is, I've got the best police chaps the world can offer us in supporting me. Our team is made up of various units of the South African Police Service, from stock theft, endangered species units to crime intelligence, to the Hawk. So having that support around you in a situation like that is extremely comforting. I think the worst part of it is leading up to it, when you're negotiating with the traders and particularly the day and the night before. I think that's probably the worst. Once you're in it, you're in it. You just sort of run with it, and you don't know what's going to happen. But obviously your priority is retrieving the pangolin out of the trade, and it happens. So when it does go down, it's a blur of events, and then afterwards it's a massive relief on a number of levels. But more importantly, that everybody is safe, and we've hopefully retrieved a pangolin out of the trade. We're not always lucky that they're alive, but it then goes into the best care I think the world can offer, and that's at Nikki and Corinne's hospital.
Wendy, can I come to you? So what was your introduction to pangolins? I mean, you're hooked. How come you're hooked? Tell us a bit about how you got going.
Yeah, no, totally hooked. I started out also not knowing anything about pangolins, not knowing what they were, and certainly not knowing that they're in such trouble with all the trade. But my interests were climate change and the effects of climate change on mammals, especially in this kind of environment. And so we came in having worked on aardvarks before, and pangolins were kind of the next best thing to do. And then, yeah, just like Corinne said earlier, the more questions there were, the more hooked you were going forward. And so 6 years later, I'm still here trying to answer some of those same questions. Still hasn't ended. So yeah, and still more questions.
Would it surprise you to still be doing this in 6 years' time?
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay, let's go to Simon. Simon, you've got an awful lot of animals that you're involved with. Tell me what's special for you about pangolins.
Yeah, good evening. I think what's special is that they're just amazing creatures that so little is known about. I mean, for us here at Pinda, I don't think we ever thought that we would see pangolins roaming this area again. They went extinct, I don't know, half a century ago, and out the blue, I got a call from a neighbor, Clinton Wright, to say that there were 2 pangolins that were going to be confiscated from the border of Mozambique, and would we be interested in releasing them? And I never thought we would ever, have the opportunity to sort of reintroduce pangolins back into this Zululand area. And knowing nothing about pangolins, I called the only person that I knew that sort of knew something about pangolins, and it was Gus van Dijk in Swalu. And by chance, he put me on to Nikki, and that's kind of how it started. We saw our first pangolin. Unfortunately, those 2 never materialized, but we were blessed. I think very fortunate to have met Nikki and then Ray and the rest of the sort of crazy pangolin team. I must say, pangolin people are crazy. They're probably one of the most dedicated sort of conservation people that I've met. And I'm afraid to say we've also probably become crazy pangolin people as well. So yeah, I think pangolins are special. They're really interesting creatures. They hard work, but also very, very satisfying, I think. And knowing how sort of threatened and endangered they are, when you have these little successes, after dedicating so much time and effort, it really is worthwhile. So yeah, that's my introduction, and the team at Pinda's introduction to pangolins and the people that you see on your screens.
Nikki, absolutely not least, but I'm afraid last. Tell us how you got into pangolins.
It was 2008, and I was the animal manager at a wildlife rehab facility, and somebody said there's this animal in a sack that's just been brought in by the police, and I went into the clinic and got handed this animal that I didn't know how to, what to do with it, how to hold it, what it was trying to get out. It had these huge claws. It was sharp. It was just so unwieldy, and that was my to pangolins. And I took it down and put it into one of our stables, quiet area, bought it some termite mound, and made it a sort of a burrow, and watched it, just absolutely gobsmacked, and just started, you can just feel yourself falling in love with this most bizarre creature. And of course, as time went on and I dealt with them more and more, I just fell for them harder and harder. And to say we're slightly besotted is not an understatement, and that we will drop everything in the middle of the night and drive to the other side of the country to rescue a pangolin is not an understatement either. So yeah, the people you see here on your screen are all very, very committed people, slightly crazy, except me, of course. I'm fine.
Well, yeah, I can't propose any sort of a sanity test, but I think if I could do, you lot would actually score quite high on the register. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. Here's a bit of a funny one, and I'm not sure I'm going to ask this to. Many years ago now, I was trying to tag poor beagle sharks, and I had them around a bait tube about 20 yards from the boat. Every time I swam out to them, they buzzed off, and every time I got back to the boat, I noticed the fins were back swimming around again. I formed the impression after about half an hour of this that the poor beagles were actually laughing their heads off at me. And I really did feel like a pretty stupid human. Nikki, I'm going to come back to you now. Have pangolins ever made you feel a bit stupid? Have they ever laughed at you?
They are, such intriguing animals. They definitely have, they're incredibly sensitive. And I've been hand raising a pup for the last 8 months. She's nearly 8 months old now, and got to know her quirks and pangolin quirks quite intimately. They definitely do have a sense of humor. They are playful, and they could definitely make you feel a bit silly. I think all animals work you out, when you work with them, and they can, if you're close to them, they can definitely make you feel a bit silly. But yeah, I'm trying to be the best pangolin mother I can to her, so she'll have to just put up with what I've got.
You're doing a brilliant job. Slightly sideways now, but I did warn you all that I never know what I was going to say till after I said it. Ray, could we just ask you, what effect has the pandemic had on pangolin poaching and trafficking you're aware of?
If you look at the trade from Africa, the figures in 2019 that I recorded intercepted leaving the African continent was 97 tons of scales. That's probably in excess of 160,000 individual pangolins. Remember, that's only what we intercepted, what was intercepted. In terms of South Africa, we retrieved 38 pangolins from the illegal trade. That was more in 2020 than 2019 before the pandemic. So the pandemic's had a bit of a knock-on effect. Livelihoods have been disrupted. People have lost their jobs. People have lost income, and people have reverted to crime. And one of those statistics in crime have been wildlife trafficking. And we saw most certainly last year an increase in the trade in pangolins from the previous year. And I think the knock-on effect was, people suffering and wanted to make a quick buck or easy buck. And the word being out there for some other bizarre reason that pangolins are worth large volumes of money. And this is the kind of perceptions that we need to stop. But in doing so, we need Asian governments and Asian communities to buy along, which to a certain extent they have in recent months, I must admit.
Can you give me an example of that? Which governments have made the right moves?
Well, the Chinese government have made 3 moves in recent times. At the end of last year, 2020, they introduced that you cannot apply for any type of government refund for medical products containing any part or form or body part of a pangolin. That was the first step. The second step earlier this year was upgrading pangolins from level 2 to level 1. That's the same level as their adored giant pangolin, panda, that they absolutely adore. So pangolins are level 1 protection. And then the third most recent step was banning any type of pangolin body part or scale into traditional cultural medicine, of which there are 60 different commercial remedies in Asia, in China. The problem with that is those products that were patented are still allowed. So there's a huge loophole that has to be closed. But that on its own has been a titanic step from the Chinese government. And the Vietnamese government have followed suit as well, as in terms of employing certain bans on what they term wet markets and what we term bush markets in Africa. So there has been a significant increase towards pangolin conservation from the East, for which we are really grateful.
And do you expect to see that sort of next year, or when figures reappear, to start hopefully being reflected in a lessening number of sting operations required?
No.
You don't?
The thing, when you're dealing with culture is like a religion. Once you follow your religion, you follow your religion. If you tell people to stop believing in their particular God or their particular religion, you're going to have a small world war at your hands. So we're seeing it going under the radar. We saw an absolute crash in the trade in pangolin scales from Africa last year, simply because routes were closed, harbors were closed, airports were closed, cross-border routes were closed. There were a major lockdown on the movement of people globally, and pangolins was one of those. Now we've seen a huge increase in cargo ships supplying empty shelves, and the movement of contraband has been a lot easier with this huge movement of a product from harbors through customs and back onto shelves. So I think there's a lot of smuggling going on that we're not aware of. I'm very aware of reliable intel from both Nigeria and China that they are stockpiling pangolin scales. So I think it's probably a temporary thing. I think what we've achieved in South Africa, this is coming directly from the underground, is that we're locking them people up. So they're being extremely cautious and extremely careful, a lot more than they used to be. And it's concerning because I think pangolins are still in the trade, but I think the level of trade is gone a deeper level underground, which is somewhat concerning.
Thank you. So dodging around yet again, Simon, those who've read my book will be aware of an animal called Zambezi. I haven't kept up with Zambezi, which is remiss of me, but he lives on your reserve. Can you tell us what is happening with Zambezi now? How is he doing? What's he doing, etc.?
We actually don't know. Zambezi is one of the pangolins which we've kind of lost track of, only because the tags that the monitoring devices that we put on them have both fallen off, and he was quite a different pangolin. I mean, they've all got different characters, and they all favor different sort of environments. And he specifically liked the mountains. I mean, Ray or Nikki might know possibly where he came from, but he headed off into the mountains here at Pinda in the west that border on Mkuzi, and we tracked his movements for about sort of 6 months. But he used to sort of crawl into these caves that I don't know how he got in there. He used to sort of flatten his body and go into these caves, because the last time we changed one of his tracking tags, in fact the photo is in your book, about a week after that, both tags fell off, and I think they got pulled off because he was squeezing himself in between the rocks and stuff. So yeah, we tried to relocate him. We set up camera traps at some of the known sort of caves that he frequented, but they like ghosts. They they're very hard to find afterwards. And if you don't have a tracking device on them, it's almost impossible to find them. So yeah, unfortunately, this particular male, we don't know where he is. And actually, it's in some ways, it's quite a nice sort of thing. He's in an area which is protected. It's safe. It's very rugged and mountainous, and a few people go there. I'm pretty confident he's still there in his cave. Well, not now. He'll be out now, but he during the day he'll go into his cave. But he's one of the few that sort of threw his device. So quite a few of them also they've been bitten off by leopards and lions, and so we've lost track of them. But we're pretty confident that they're still around. But unfortunately, this particular one, I can't tell you. He's kind of free and wild again.
Well, that's good. Those two words are hugely powerful. Free and wild again. That's brilliant. Yeah. And you must have had several animals you've expected to lose, and hopefully several that you've come in and eventually not lost. Is there any one particular that sticks out in your mind? You think, wow, that's a miracle. That one should have been dead, but it came round. Is it one that you remember? You can tell us about, Karen?
Oh, me. Sorry. I was like wondering who you're talking to. Sure, that is a difficult question.
What animal sticks out in your mind that you thought, gosh, that's not going to make it, and then they did, and tell us about it.
We had one that came in with a snare wound. What was his name again, Nikki? Can you remember? Tom. So Tom came in and he had a snare around his upper body, and it had gone in so deep that it had cut all the way into the muscle in his chest. And I can hear myself now. And eventually, when we got him, we got it off, but it was so deep under the scales and so deep into the muscles. And my biggest fear was that if we're going to take this off, we're going to have a hole in the chest cavity, and then we're lost. But we had some really awesome wound products, and look, he had other problems as well. He had pneumonia, because they often have pneumonia. So, you look at this animal and you just think, jeepers, how many issues can one have? And it took us 4 months to get him back to health, and he's been released and he's doing well. He for me was one of the miracle animals, and that it healed completely, and he gained weight and he looks fantastic now. Brilliant. I think he also went to Pinda.
Yeah.
No, he's here still with us, and yeah, he's one of the pangolins that I can tell you where he is, but yeah, he's doing very, very well. He's settled. He's in a nice area, and yeah, fat and healthy.
He's one of the pangolins that's actually behaving himself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one of the few.
Well, breeding season is coming up, so I'm hoping that he does his job now. He's healthy. There's females we've released there with Pinda, so we've given him all the opportunities he can have to make more of himself.
Wendy, can I come to you? When I interviewed you and I was writing the book, you told me some stories about people visiting Swalu who had come from a long way all over the world to see this animal they'd dreamt about, and so on and so forth. Can you just tell us a couple of people pangolin stories that you've been involved with? I found those two stories you told me very moving.
Yeah, I mean, every people interaction that I have is quite special. I think people that are coming to Swalu for pangolins, they've been dreaming of this moment for so long, and it's one of my favorite moments is to be able to give them that experience. But the two that you are talking about, one was, I think she was a 70-something-year-old lady, probably from California or something, I can't remember. And she had arrived and said to her guide, I'm only here for pangolin. I've been looking for pangolins my entire life. She said something like 70 years, and that is pretty much her entire life. And unfortunately, I was with a very shy pangolin at the time, and it's not an ideal pangolin to show to people because you could just see the tail. It's not doing very much. So the guide had called me and said, look, this person is desperate. I said, okay, sure, bring her over, but just don't raise her expectations. Let her know this is not going to be the greatest sighting in the world. This is going to be the tail of a pangolin. So she brought this lady in, and the lady just saw that speck of the tail and she was in tears. And I just kind of looked at her and thought, are you okay? What's going on? She said, you have no idea what you've just done for me. You've just fulfilled my lifetime's dream. And I just thought, this is so crazy, because all she sees is a pangolin's tail. You know, I'm most of us here are used to seeing a pangolin walking around doing its thing, its natural thing, and it's like, it's so invigorating, and she's just so overwhelmed by just seeing the tail of a pangolin. And that's what these animals can do to you, you know. And that's just the tail, not even, you know, a lot of us will speak about the eye of the pangolin, the way when you see that eye, that just changes your world, you know. And this woman came in and just saw the tail. And then the other story was an older gentleman who was quite sickly. He had also pretty much, I think in your book, Richard, you describe him as this experience as pretty much his like dying wish was to come and see a pangolin. And he came out, and it was luckily during the day, so it wasn't, we didn't have to do too much work and encroach on this pangolin too much. We could watch it from a distance, and he had his binoculars with him, and he saw this pangolin. And yeah, it was just like, you could tell he was very sickly, but he had gotten out of bed that day just to see that pangolin. And he looked at me again and just said, "You don't even realize what you've just done for me." And I was just like, oh, you guys don't understand what you do for me when you know, enjoy this experience as much as I do, you know. So it's quite something to live that experience day after day through other people's eyes. It's quite a special thing.
You probably won't want to answer this question, but you are one of the leading scientists. Can you tell us of anything new and exciting that's coming up in terms of science, or is it all top secret and you're waiting to publish it?
No, not much of it is top secret. A lot of it we've kind of put out there with laid media and stuff. I mean, yeah, I guess there's not much I can tell you that a lot of these guys around here don't already know. But yeah, I guess the fussy nature is quite a big one. For the first time, we've actually been able to quantify the diet, not just through observations, but by looking at or sifting through pangolin poos, which was quite something in my time here. But yeah, not telling us anything super new that we didn't already know, but telling us a lot about the seasonal changes in the diet and how much they depend on those specific species, which I'm sure, as these guys would be able to tell you, changes depending on the location that they're at. The body temperature stuff was very, very, very interesting. So Ray's student that he was talking about earlier did some stuff on body temperature, and so we kind of took that a bit further. Also very, very interesting stuff. And I guess the big take-home message with that was that climate change will have an impact on these animals. So they're not only dealing with this poaching thing or electrocution on fences, they're dealing with a lot of issues, and now potentially climate change as well. And it comes down to the effects of climate change on their food resources, because they are such fussy eaters in the environment. They just don't seem to have the ability to switch their diet when things go south. So yeah, it's not looking good in that aspect.
Ray, back to you and back to sting operations. Are you, broadly speaking, satisfied with the convictions that happen? Do too many people get off? I mean, what's the kind of conversion rate catch to going to jail?
Yeah, so sort of prior to 2016, 2015, it was, you know, 1,000 Rand fine, 150 US dollars, if that. And then ever since, you know, we attend, if we can, and we do the majority. One of us, Nikki, Karin, or myself, testify in aggravation of sentencing at these court cases, no matter where they are in the country. And we've achieved significant results in the last years where we're receiving sentences of 8 years jail term and 7 years jail term and 5 years jail term. So we are getting every now and again one slipping through the cracks that I heard of today, where magistrates are not educated and stuff, you know. But we certainly providing workshops to the judiciary, providing evidence in aggravation. There are at least 3 statements that go into every docket: a statement on the trade in South Africa and the trade in Africa from me, a hospital statement as well, and then a condition statement. You know, animal welfare, all these pangolins are compromised. That's a certainty in every single case. It just depends on the level of how they're compromised. And when I say compromised, and Nikki and Dr. Karin will agree, it's both mentally and physically compromised, because we used to just, you know, discharge them from hospital, go out to the release site, open the car door and open a couple of beers. those pangolins probably didn't make it. You have to follow them long term, like what Simon and his team are doing at Phinda and others doing in Zululand. You have to monitor these guys. You have to monitor them long term because they deal with a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder, that they feel another abandonment, that their carers, because they get very close to their carers, particularly individuals that don't particularly like men. Well, I don't blame them. If, you know, men are generally not very nice creatures, but men are in the trade. That there's cigarettes, there's loud music, there's laughing, and so a lot of these pangolins have this negative affinity towards men, and they take to ladies much better, as most of us should, you know. But nevertheless, they do need the slow, passive, soft release introduction to their new environment to overcome these fears that they have, because the older pangolins all had territories, they all had home ranges, they had you know, other female pangolins and territorial pangolins they know, and they were just picked up out of the blue, tossed into a sack, into the back of somebody's boot, and experienced the most horrific environment that is more conducive to the human trafficking, and that's what these animals go through, and the things we see and the things staff at the hospital see is traumatizing, to say the least, to us. But you know, we've learned so much and about pangolins in the last 10 years. I've got a number of postgraduate students doing various research on pangolins, from parasites to physiology to population genetics to evolutionary biology, and the things we've learned about each pangolin's personality. Some of the pangolins we know don't come from Zimbabwe. We know they're more affinity towards Mozambique because they have a preference for those ants and termites that occur there. So they've got taste preferences, they've got habitat preferences, they've got personalities and intelligence that it ranks close to a border collie. It's insane what we've learned about these animals. Nikki's telling me stories about what pangolins are tasting out in the wild, which aren't just ants and termites, and she'll tell you some plants, you know, it's madness. And some of the tropical pangolins, the tree pangolins, like the white-bellied pangolin, have an affinity for palm oil and an affinity for honey. The way they communicate, we're absolutely clueless. And they do. We released a pangolin in Mpumalanga that was about 7 kilometers from another one we released there. The next day, that pangolin that we previously released there had found the new pangolin. How on earth do they communicate? We're starting to have an insight into their reproductive behavior. We caught a little bit of pangolin porn the other day, which was wonderful. I played it again and again. That was recorded by one of our field managers, Lino Sierra, which is a Mexican girl that's appointed as one of our field managers in Zululand. And a mating behavior between two pangolins that remains unrecorded until then. So all of the stuff we have to write up, you know, we just have to try and find the time to do it.
You mentioned PTSD. Nikki, can you tell us how sentient are pangolins? Do they really, what do they feel and how much do they feel? What do you think? You're handling them all day, every day. You're probably as close to them as any human ever gets.
I think they all do suffer from PTSD to a certain degree, and just watching them, you very quickly get a sense of how much PTSD they suffer from. We've got a little pangolin in the hospital at the moment who's been terribly brutalized by his captors. He had 2 broken tibias. He has a fractured scapula and an old fractured rib. His one claw was ripped right out. I mean, the force that had to be used to do that. And this little pangolin is a youngster. He's probably about, I don't know, he's definitely under a year. And this little chap has taken a very long, slow time to get used to being handled, to be with one person who takes him out feeding. We have to dig to open up the ground for him to feed properly because he can't manage that on his own. And this little pangolin is suffering from severe PTSD. So we have to be very quiet and very gentle and very calm around him. Others, however, just bounce out of their boxes and go and feed and don't mind if you walk right over them. It's quite interesting. So, but we can always tell that, you know, what's gone on. Even if they don't have injuries, we can tell from their behavior how much bad treatment they've had and how much psychological trauma they are going through. And then they need very specific type of handling to try and get them to ease up and to just calm down enough to be a pangolin again. And then we can start thinking about putting them into the release process.
And do they have individual human favorites? And are they mostly women? Do they not really like men all that much?
There are one or two men that they do like. No, they do have favorites. They're definitely favorites. There's some pangolins that feed a lot better with some people than with other people. Our people that take them walking, our team of walkers, we do have a couple of men on that team, and they're very sensitive men. So they're soft and they're gentle with the pangolins, and the pangolins respond to that. If you had, a very sort of alpha, loud, brash kind of male working with pangolins, I don't think they'd do very well. But having said that, there are very alpha males at all these, at a lot of our release sites, but they're obviously also very sensitive to the animals. So the animals do respond well to them as well. Yeah.
Wendy, I remember you telling me a story about how you were, there was evidence that an animal was responding to your voice, which I found fascinating. Can you tell us that story, please?
Yeah, people ask me this one all the time, and I could never say for sure whether they do, but just based on a couple of situations. So there was this one event where I had walked up to the pangolin. So a lot of the pangolins that I had worked with, I would walk up to them and then just kind of start talking so they recognize the voice, so that they can just carry on and do their thing as they should be doing. And sometimes I'd walk up silently and be downwind, so they can't really smell me, but they would hesitate and they know something's there, but they weren't sure what was going on. And as soon as I'd start talking, then they'd be like, all right, it's just you, I can carry on then. So I think in some ways, I mean, I'm sure Nikki and Karina could say more about that, but I think they probably do respond to the voices. They know people.
Great. Well, look, we've got 5 of you here. There's a lot of questions I'm seeing, and it's a unique opportunity for people to ask you guys who are right on the spot. So I'm going to turn this over now to questions.
Yes, we have actually quite a lot of questions. And the first question, actually, Nikki was sort of touched on this, and maybe Ray also kind of touched on this. And I was thinking about it as I read Richard's book. And now when I read it, I also didn't have a great understanding of the emotions that pangolins are able to feel and how sentient they really are. And so Ruth Holloway is asking, how do pangolins show their affection? And what are their unique characteristics?
Does she indicate who the question's for?
No, she did not, but I'm thinking maybe Nikki. Nikki and Karine would be the favorite people to answer this question.
Let Nikki go first and then I'll go after her.
Okay, so excuse me, I was going to say that my best example would be this pup that I'm raising at the moment, who's obviously very close to me and knows me very, very well. I've had her since she was born, and she gets incredibly affectionate. So when she's been out feeding and she gets tired and I have to pick her up to carry her because she's a little baby and she wants uppy, she'll roll over onto her back in my arms and start kind of gazing at me, and then she'll work her way up my body until she gets to my face, and she starts kind of smelling all over my face, and she's smelling my breath, and I don't know if she's reading pheromones or picking up scent on my breath. But she gets extremely soft and extremely, I've had pangolin tongue up my nose. I think that's a good sign of affection. Very odd sign, but it is a sign. But she gets very, very soft and very sweet. So yeah, like any mammal, any mammal will be playful. They can get a bit kind of boisterous and bitey or hurt. Like a pangolin will start clawing you and grab onto you with its tail, which is quite painful. but they'll also get very soft and loving and affectionate because they're after all, they're a mammal, and they need that back from the person who's caring for them. And although they look so hard on the outside, on the inside, they're just little soft mammals with long tongues.
For me, it's not really the affection bit that, I mean, that's awesome to see because you can see the bond between Nikki and Tot. But for me, is when they get playful, especially the little ones. And Nikki can also say, no, we've had one or two that sort of they climb up the hill and then they roll onto their back and they roll and they swish their tail. And the next one, they roll down the hill. So you think, oh God, what now? No, they grow back up again and roll back down. So it's a game. They like doing it. So it's like almost like a child playing. And the first time we saw it, we were just completely fascinated. And it's happened more than once. So they're so relaxed with the person that they're with that they actually just play like they would normally. And if they can find a good dung heap, like zebra or whatever they like, they'll roll in that and play with it and smear it all over their bodies. And, you know, that's a relaxed pangolin. That's a happy pangolin.
Wow. So Sabrina is asking, is it possible to volunteer with you guys, and how would one get in touch? So maybe Simon and Ray. Someone is asking, is it possible to volunteer? Well, actually, I think everyone, Nikki and Karin as well. Is it possible to volunteer with you guys?
No, they can.
Maybe I should go first. We don't, the African Pangolin Working Group currently doesn't have volunteering facilities available. So maybe at a later stage when we have a facility that's up and running, it would be possible. I also don't want to take volunteers in harm's way. So at this stage, no, not really. On to you.
For us, they can just email us. And then they can, they're obviously not going to just work with pangolins. They have to be a bit more experienced to work with the pangolins. That's reserved for people that's been with us for a bit longer. But, you know, you do get to see them if you volunteer with us.
All right. Yes. Thank you. And then there's a question from Carmen. And she's saying, I heard that it is hard for them to breed in captivity, but that might be the only way to keep their numbers up. How do we combat this? And then there's a follow-up question, and she says, and does captivity change the ability to breed when they are released? So maybe Wendy and Simon, would you like to take this one?
Simon, you go for it. I don't think that's a question that I'd be able to answer right now.
Yeah, look, to be honest, I'm not so sure about the breeding in captivity. I think Ray is probably better to answer that. But what I can say about you know, some of the pangolins that we've received, we've got one particular individual, a male that's been hand raised, you know, and I'm pretty sure. Look, we haven't observed any sort of breeding behavior, but I'm pretty sure in you know, in time he's completely rewilded from being a sort of a hand raised pangolin. He's completely rewilded. And so I'm pretty sure he's going to breed at some stage in the wild, but actually breeding in captivity, I don't know. I can't answer that, to be honest. I think maybe Professor Janssen can maybe talk to that.
Yeah, it's there's huge ethical issues. The first problem is the Temminck's pangolin, the one that occurs down in Southern Africa, do not forage in captivity. So Nikki and Karin's staff have to literally walk between anything between 3 and even up to 6 hours, sometimes even longer. And in the middle of winter, in the middle of the night, in compromised conditions, because they many times they're alone in the bush, walking with these pangolins that they have to feed naturally. So that's the first problem. The second problem is if by some miracle means you do find some magical way of feeding them in captivity, it's an ethical dilemma because they don't survive in captivity for any length or period of time. You get certain species like great whites, they just don't do it. Well, pangolins are one of those. You may be able to pull it off under extremely good conditions, such as you might find in the United States, but they compromise. Their guts are compromised, their metabolisms are compromised on a foreign diet. And even if you can get it right, it's still, we don't see any rational reason why there should be captive breeding of pangolins. I don't think the debate is whether they can or can't. I think it's whether we should or shouldn't.
Yeah.
Pangolins belong in the wild. We're not at the stage where Africa's pangolins need some sort of ex situ conservation strategy in place. The first thing we need to do is conserve their habitat and stop this global pandemic of the trade, not the pandemic we have, the pandemic that's the illegal wildlife trade on these mammals. And I think that's what we need to resolve first and foremost, whether we need to consider an ex situ captive breeding population or no, not yet. I don't think so personally. And I don't think it should be put on the table quite yet. The other problem is they're extremely romantic, charismatic animals. You know, they're more tame, half-bred tigers in captivity in the United States than there are in the wild. You don't want to see pangolins going this way, and it can very, very, very rarely happen. So I wouldn't even want to entertain those thoughts at this stage. We need to keep them wild and make sure they stay wild.
Corinne, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add they're also very solitary. They don't occur in herds or groups or anything. They only get together once a year, once every 2 years to mate. And that's it. We've had pangolins where we'd walk them quite close to one another and they really don't like it. So I'm not sure how you're going to do that in a zoo environment where you have to have two in the same area. There was one Temminck's pangolin in a zoo that I know of that they'd kept for 8 years and they tube fed it twice a day because it couldn't eat. I mean, that just to me is horrific. And I agree with Ray. Having more pangolins in a zoo environment, captive breeding than the wild is not really conserving the animal. It's just making more display animals, really, because you're not releasing it. Unless you release them, maybe, but I don't think in the case of a pangolin it's going to work.
Generally, how long do they live? What's their lifespan under normal circumstances?
We don't actually know that for sure. Maybe Wendy can say something about hers, but we guesstimate about 15 to 18 years, like a cat. We're not sure.
Yeah, I think that's quite realistic. I was following one for 4 years who was already an adult, and so I guesstimated him at 8 to 10 years. So yeah, I think 15, probably very close to that.
All right, and then thank you for that. And then we have another question from Dominique Villion, who's saying, as a conservationist who has recently graduated how would you advise someone wanting to dive deeper into their studies and practical work for saving pangolins? Personally, I'm hoping to do my PhD on their behavior. So I'll leave it up to the panel. Ray. Wendy.
Wise Ray.
You can send me a project proposal. I'm all over the internet like a bad rash. So the lovely thing about pangolins is it's an open book of, what Wendy's, I can't wait to read her work. What she's probably discovered up there, both with behavior and physiology in an extremely unique environment that's the Kalahari, is going to be fascinating. But we can do similar studies in other parts of Africa that differ in variable climate. So in many ways, we can almost try and see what Wendy did there and replicate it in the Congo and or other areas. So I think behavior in pangolins is a brand new book with lots of pages that have yet to be typed. So I'm open to any future students who want to come on board. There's lots to be done. Lots.
Okay. Nikki, did you want to say something?
How far are we from closing out?
So we have like 2 minutes.
Okay,
but
well, come back to me at the end.
Yes, but there's just one quick question from Hillary, specifically to, Ray's mentioned, are there any pangolins in Ado Elephant Park?
Ado Elephant.
Okay.
No. So the most south that we find the Temminck's pangolin is Mozambique, far northern KwaZulu-Natal now because we've reintroduced a population, and Simon has. But that's the most far south, I would say, is northern Zululand. In terms of South Africa, Pilanesberg National Park, then where Wendy works, the Kalahari, Kruger National Park, all the periphery borders, but there are no pangolins in the Cape, Eastern Cape, the Free State, and certainly not that part of the South Coast at all, unfortunately.
Right. Thank you, Ray. For everyone, there are so many questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to get through all the questions. So they will be answered, and the answers and responses will be emailed to you. So before we close, I'm going to hand over back to Richard Pierce.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that we've all learned a little. I've certainly learned a lot. One of the things I've learned is that the question wasn't so mad. Pangolins are people too. And that means we've got to look after them. And we've met 5 people today who really do dedicate their lives to looking after them. They all need applause, they all need support. And you're looking at an impoverished little author who's written a book about pangolins. So if you want to go and buy that book, I'd be very happy as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And I really hope it's been a show you've enjoyed and you've learned as much as I have.
Wow.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. This was wonderful. And also to be invited to more talks and hear about Straight Nature's new natural history publications, please join the Straight Nature Club, and the link is on the chat. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Good morning,
you.
good evening, good night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night. Goodbye.